Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, and I'd like to welcome you to episode 19 of Unfair and Unbalanced, a podcast with Tom Fox and Roy Snell. Roy, of course, is the president of the Society of Corporate Compliance and Ethics, SCCE. In this episode, Roy and I take a look at the 50th anniversary of the release of Sgt. Pepper's, the debut of the Beatles on Sirius with a 24-hour channel, and compliance of the Sgt. Pepper's album. We also take a look at the issue of artificial intelligence, ComTech, or compliance technology, as it might apply to some of the more mundane functions of compliance. And we take a look at compliance, the Compliance and Ethics Institute 2017. This is Tom Fox. Thank you very much for joining us on this episode of Unfair and Unbalanced. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. I'm the compliance evangelist, and I'm back with my good friend Roy Snell, the CEO of the SCCE, the Society of Corporate Compliance and Ethics, for another episode of Unfair and Unbalanced, our podcast about all things for the compliance profession. Roy, welcome.
Good morning, Tom. I'm looking forward to this. Okay, Tom, I want to tell you an absolutely interesting fact that you may not be aware of that's really relevant to our podcast today. Do you know that Sirius XM just added a 24-hour channel dedicated solely to the Beatles' music?
You know, actually, I had heard that announcement, Roy, and I think it's a long overdue, a great addition to the Sirius family. And in honor of Sgt. Pepper's 50th birthday this year, I think it's kudos to Sirius for finally doing it.
Well, I know you wrote an article, and this is something that you do quite often and make, therefore, the reading a lot more interesting, but you wrote an article about Sgt. Pepper's, the song Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, relating it to the compliance profession. Can you tell us a little bit about the metaphor?
Sure. So actually, it's the first of a series of articles, Roy, because that was one of the most seminal albums of my life. I stared at that album cover for hours before I even learned about what other enhancements you might want to listen to music with. And I read the lyrics on the back, and I listened to that album for hours. But I've always been fascinated by the album cover. So this first blog post, I'm going to do a series over the year and then collect them into to a longer white paper. But the first one really focused on the album. And, the front of the album is, I think, the most iconic album cover ever. And it has a large group of or photographs of a large number of people, some very interesting artwork. So I took a look at the really just the leadership lessons that you might be able to draw from the album cover. And I found some really interesting things. And the first one was that it was largely Paul who came up with a concept, but his original concept was more abstract art, and he'd done a lot of drawings and worked with artists to help develop some drawings, and that really then they took that part and used those for the colors. The next really interesting thing was it turned out that there had been a Swedish band who about 3 years before, in a tribute album to the Beatles, even in 1964, they were already doing Beatles tribute albums. They had basically the same artwork with a large number of photographs on the cover, and it's not really clear whether or not Paul or the Beatles were aware of that. But if you look at the two, they're strikingly the same. And the point is, there are really no new ideas in compliance. The concepts are well known, and you talk about them, in
That's correct.
In the cave you used to live in even. They were apparent some 25 years ago. So it's really how you synthesize those ideas, and it's how you use the ideas that have been around for so long in new and different business situations. Um, the I was very interested in one part of the story, and the story came from a Rolling Stone album. I should cite to the source because, of course, when you write a blog, you always want to cite to the source, as we now know. The They interviewed, or at least asked questions of some of the people whose pictures were up, and I thought Mae West had the greatest response when they asked her if she could be would be on the album cover, and she did agree. Her question was, "What would I be doing in a Lonely Hearts Club band?" So, seek input from your stakeholders. So, just a plethora of compliance related lessons from the album cover. It's I just can't really talk enough about the album cover. We haven't even gotten to the music yet, and we're going to get to that because unusual for them, the two left Beatles who are left with us, Ringo Starr and Paul McCartney, or Sir Paul McCartney, I should say, are releasing a special edition with a large number of tracks that both didn't make it on the album and preliminary versions of the songs. They're going to have some DVDs, the recording sessions, a original mono recording, which of course that's how George Martin recorded all of the Beatles albums, double tracked the sound, and even by the time of Sgt. Pepper, 4-tracked the sound over for the beautiful stereo we have now. So as you can tell, I'm a fan of the album. I still think it's the greatest rock and roll album in the world, and there's lots of leadership lessons to learn from that. And we probably need to dedicate an entire podcast to the Paul is dead phenomenon, but we'll leave that one for another time.
Well, I think, Tom, one of the things that you said that I think is one of the, I just couldn't agree more with the idea that there's nothing new here in compliance. That the beauty of the solution that is it's elegantly simple. Unfortunately, a lot of people try and complicate the living heck out of it. But more importantly, what they don't understand is that these are all the tools that were available to us prior to compliance starting. You might ask, well, what's new here? Well, what's new here is a single individual with, when set up right, the independence, the authority, and accountability to use all the tools at their disposal, audit, investigation, reporting, education, and policies and so forth to prevent, find, and fix problems. All these things were here before, but they were not used in an orchestrated, continuous manner. They were siloed, and it wasn't working. And I think it's important to understand that because people are trying to make more out of this than there is. This isn't that. I'm going to get shot for this, but I just don't think preventing, finding, and fixing problems is all that hard if the compliance program is set up correctly. So, but I look forward to another edition of this someday where we talk more about the metaphor. You sent me an email before we got on the phone here, and I'm really eager to hear about your question with regard to AI because I don't know if you knew it, but I ran into a little AI controversy yesterday on LinkedIn. What was your question there?
So, I saw where you had written on it and given some thoughts, and I've been thinking about it, and I wrote about it, really was inspired to think about it and write about it even more this week by yourself. So I just thought we might explore it. Matt Kelly and I talked about it in a podcast. I'm talking to really as many compliance professionals and compliance practitioners as I can, and those in the industry. So just thought we'd see where it might go.
Well, here's what happened to me. I just did a little update, kind of a almost Twitter-looking thing on LinkedIn that said, some claim that artificial intelligence is going to help compliance and ethics officers and compliance programs. And I said, isn't artificial intelligence what got us into this mess? And as is occasionally the case, I was obtuse enough in my little attempt at humor to confuse some folks. And within about 2 hours, I looked and I had like 9 comments. And some people got the point and commented on it, but a couple of them thought that I meant that artificial intelligence software got us into this mess. And I just wasn't clear. I totally understand why they were confused. They thought that I meant that artificial intelligence software got us into this mess. So I immediately clarified it. And I even went so far this morning as to correct the post. I added something. So if anybody reads it now, right underneath it is an explanation. And, but it got me to thinking, as it has you, about AI. I actually got a personal message from a guy that says, you really need to study AI. And I thought, well, yeah, if I meant what you thought I meant, I should, but I'm not opining about AI. But then I remembered that 35 years ago, I wrote some software that might be considered AI. I wrote software to collect weather data. I was working at the University of Wisconsin right out of college. And a professor was the brains behind the thing, but I wrote software that collect weather data, and you could predict blight in potatoes. Blight's completely predictable because it won't grow under certain weather conditions, but blights will grow under a high humidity, high temperature, and with this software, this guy, professor, could predict when blight was coming and warn the farmers. And rather than spray all the time because they didn't know when it was going to come, they sprayed when they needed it. And so it reduced the amount of blight reduce the amount of chemicals being used. And so oddly enough, 35 years ago, before AI and being green was cool, I was into AI. Not that I knew it, but I was into AI and being green. And the point is that I'm not completely naive about what AI is and what it could do. But I just would say that I'm sorry, but the number one thing is it's not going to solve the problems, the major problems that we're having. The AI, maybe it could have predicted that bogus bank accounts are being set up, but that wasn't the problem. Everybody knew that bogus bank accounts were being, not everybody, but enough people in leadership knew the bogus bank accounts were being set up that they consciously chose not to fix the problem. I mean, what are you going to have? A computer in the room that's listening to the conversation during, 7 or so leaders who's saying, well, we got this problem. What are we going to do? We're going to do nothing. And then the computer starts bleeping and saying, danger, danger, Will Robinson. And then leadership's going to say, well, thank you, Watson. We'll get that corrected right away. The greatest skill of a compliance professional is their interpersonal skills, particularly skills like influence. Wells Fargo, Penn State, Health South. There's a whole bunch of the major malfunctions that have occurred from a compliance and ethics profession perspective that it just AI that required someone to be in the room at the time that had tremendous interpersonal skills. And even though it was like 6-1 against them, everybody's saying don't fix it. The best compliance officers I know are able to provide the facts and the data and paint the picture that this is a bad decision and get the rest of them to go the other way. Just like there's always occasionally somebody in the room that says, we should add this particular product. 6 people say no, they provide the data and evidence, and then everybody says, oh, heck yes. We're not the only people that get rejected sometimes. Our job is hard. And a lot of times there aren't people in the room who get it. But those who are effective at debate and argument and motivation and influence carry the day. And AI isn't going to do a darn thing for us on that. Now, I think your specific question was another angle that I think is really interesting. And that is, you skipped over that part and you just said, it's probably going to replace some of the mundane tasks of compliance professionals that are entry level in the trench folks, like I'm aware of, but I don't know anything about it, is some software that's considered an AI audit package. Never saw it, never looked at it, don't understand it. Matter of fact, that's what the guy who was confused about my post about AI said, you got to look at this. And so let's assume that there is software out there that could aid compliance professionals or the compliance department in automating or making more intelligent some of their job, adding artificial intelligence to the compliance officer's toolkit. And it will probably come first in the more mundane tasks, as you had implied. Nobody's out there trying to write software to listen in on a leadership conversation and then determine that they're going down the wrong path. If that's going to happen, it's going to be a long way down the road. But I'll tell you this. I got into IT about 35 years ago. And they told me that this new computer, this personal computer thing that I was working on, was going to create a paperless society. And they're not even in the ballpark of being right yet, and it's 35 years later. There is an element of people in IT and in society watching IT that get overly excited about the potential. There is a gap between the time we think that a computer could do something and a computer could actually do something. They're off by decades, and in some cases, a century. And we just have to be a little bit careful about assuming that AI is going to be a huge asset for the compliance department. However, it could be out there now, it could be coming shortly, but even if it provided a great deal of relief for the compliance officer, to very specifically answer your question, Tom, we have so much to do and so little time to do it, and like many other departments, I'm not complaining, never enough resources, that AI could come in and make a 20, 25, 30% hit on or addition to the productivity. In other words, they could replace 3 people, and those 3 people wouldn't go anywhere. They would be put on tasks that weren't being done but were desperately needed at that time. So I don't see AI impacting the growth in compliance anytime soon. I hope it's great. I don't know that much about it. I hope it automates a lot. I hope it finds lots of problems. I hope it automates auditing or some investigations. But there's just so much of this job that is not currently automatable, such as the example of haggling with leadership about a known problem and having them somehow rationalize not doing anything.
So I guess I see really any technological advance that can make work flow more efficiently is something that if not embraced, we should certainly investigate and see if it works for us going forward. And so I coined the term ComTech based on law tech. But what I see in the law with technology is, as I said in a piece entitled AI and Compliance Going Forward, Welcome to ComTech, that some of the more rote tasks that are particularly paper or data driven at this point can lend themselves to an AI, but I would just call that a software approach. I've helped write code. You've helped write code. I don't consider what I did AI. I consider what I did just coding, and developed algorithms which were utilized in software. So looking at large numbers of data to see trends, to look at a historical basis, looking at large amounts of data in an M&A transaction, looking at large numbers of files for keyword searches, looking at emails for keyword searches. All of those types of exercises, which could be done by a lawyer, which could be done by a compliance professional, which could be done by an individual, are things that can be done more efficiently, more quickly through the use of some sort of software or program. And that's really where I see us right at this point. If there are ways for software programs to be written where that they can learn upon themselves, similar to what IBM did with Big Blue in its chess match with Garry Kasparov, that might be a different level. But Big Blue was not learning itself. Big Blue is being reprogrammed on a nightly basis by IBM engineers to learn the moves that were made on that day of chess. So the humans were putting those algorithms into the program, and the program was becoming larger, greater, more efficient. So that's where I see kind of where we are now, and the human element, the human analysis will always need to be there. But for AI, I see us moving forward with it.
And again, with the limited IT background I've had, and I got to tell you, I'm no expert. I just studied it in college for a while as kind of a minor, and spent about 6 years in the field. I just couldn't agree more with everything you just said. I think sometimes we throw around the AI title a little generously, that we're just automating a manual process, and I don't necessarily consider that AI. Over time, I think those guys will get there. I think there's possibly some way to do it. I just don't see a lot of examples of it today. And frankly, like I said, I've been hearing it for 35 years. And I will tell you this, that I bungled my little AI comment and confused some folks and got corrected, and I was able to clarify it. The beauty of writing in social media as opposed to monthly magazines, you get immediate feedback and you can straighten the thing out. I don't mean to demean the effort and the advances and how far we've come. In fact, we have, as you know, a lot of conferences. We have a couple of big ones. I don't know how many vendors are going to be with us this fall, but they have maybe 75. I don't know, and I think not only do I think these things have come a long way and are very helpful, but many of these vendors have them, and I have said this at a few of the last annual meetings. In the opening remarks, as compliance professionals, we have an obligation to study the options that are available from the vendors to assist our company to prevent, find, and fix ethical and regulatory problems, particularly given the resource issue, the challenges of never having enough resources. We owe it to our leadership to go in and study these options, these available tools and services. Frankly, I think it's one of the biggest parts of my job as a CEO of this organization is is not to sit around and try and decide everything myself, but to go find some expert in the field of whatever it is we're trying to do at the moment and bring them in as cost effectively as possible and say, let's get this done. I think all too many people think I got this. I can do this by myself. I don't need any outside expertise. And I will just pick your expertise because you're on the phone. People sitting around trying to sort through the FCPA law, particularly given the international complexity associated with anti-bribery laws, are out of their minds if they don't occasionally bring in an expert like yourself who can sit down in the meeting where they're having this discussion about the education or auditing or things they're doing or regs they're studying in various countries, and have you look for those opportunities to get them from falling in a hole or send them in the right direction. So, I'm not trying to sell anybody's product here. I'm just saying that it's a big part of anybody's job in a leadership role is to understand the tools, whether it's AI or anything else available to them, and letting their organization know when they think the return on investment of time and money spent with a particular service or product is so great that they have to do it. And you can't do that if you don't study these things. And, one of the greatest places is, forget our conference, any conference, 80% of conferences have vendors. And a lot of people just buzz right by. And I think it's something that we ought to spend more time on. Many, many great tools out there, and we need all the help we can get.
Well, Roy, unfortunately, we're at the end of our time, so we're probably going to have to save the rest of our topics for next time. But as always, a great conversation, and I look forward to continuing it with you.
Thank you very, very much, Tom. I really appreciate the opportunity.
This is Tom Fox again. I'd like to thank you for listening to this episode of Unfair and Unbalanced. I have two requests for you. The first is if you've listened to this podcast on iTunes, we will greatly appreciate it if you would rate the podcast, as it would help our rankings and help get the word out about the only podcast that deals with the compliance profession. Also, if you have any questions, please feel free to email me at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. This is Tom Fox. I hope you will join us again for another episode of Unfair and Unbalanced.